Chapter 6. Monday, late afternoon, Jessica was having the time of her life. About 25 kids had gathered around the pool behind Delilah's huge, beautiful house, and Jessica was right where she always liked to be, at the center of attention. It was a great party. Alongside the pool, there was a grill and a buffet table where potato salad, coleslaw, pretzels, corn chips, and lots of other things were set out. There was even a big cake, all white except for the tiny pink candy roses that encircled it, and the elaborate script on top. In pink icing it spelled out, Jessica for President. Jessica didn't know if the party would get her any votes, but it was definitely fun. Everyone was having a good time. Friends were either jumping into the pool or getting pushed in. She tried to stay a little distance from the water since her hair looked absolutely perfect and she didn't want to get it wet. So she just stretched out on a deck chair and let everyone come to her. "Congratulations!" Betsy Gordon called from the other side of the pool. She had just arrived with 2 other 7th grade unicorns. Jessica flashed her biggest smile and waved to them. Of course, being 7th graders meant they couldn't vote for her, but they still might have influence. Charlie Cashman ambled over to her. He was a 6th grader who frequently got into trouble at school with his best friend, Jerry McAllister. But they'd both helped the unicorns out with some of their schemes, and Charlie had a vote, so Jessica gave him a big smile, too. "This is cool," Charlie said approvingly. "Once you're 6th grade president, we can do some really wild stuff at school." Jessica wasn't sure what he meant. All she had in mind was that big costume party, but she nodded enthusiastically and said, "Oh, sure, absolutely," before he ran back to the pool and shoved in some girl. Jessica turned to Janet Howell, Leela's cousin and president of the Unicorn Club, who was sitting on the chair next to hers. "What does a class president do, anyway?" Janet shrugged. "I haven't the slightest idea." "Oh, but it's good that you're running," Janet continued. "This will give the unicorns more power." Jessica nodded. "I hope it's not too much work, though. I don't want to have to start collecting canned foods or anything like that." Janet didn't reply. She was busy adjusting her chair so she could get the full benefit of the sun. A few yards away, Leela was saying something to a group of kids, and they were all laughing. Jessica decided it was worth getting up to find out what was so funny. "What are you guys laughing about?" she asked them. "We pulled a great stunt on your sister today," Leela told her. "She left a bunch of flyers sitting on a table in the library. Ellen saw them in there." Jessica had forgotten about Elizabeth's flyers. "What about them?" Leela giggled. "Well, when Elizabeth wasn't looking, Ellen grabbed the whole stack. We dumped them in the fountain in front of school. You should have seen Elizabeth's face when she found them floating around. And then she had to fish them all out. It was a riot." For a moment, Jessica felt a little funny. Elizabeth had worked pretty hard on those flyers. But still, this was a competition, and the image of those neatly printed flyers floating around the fountain was kind of funny. "Tell us about the party we're going to have with the book fair money," Brooke Dennis said, walking over to Jessica. Brooke wasn't a unicorn, but she was a good friend of the Wakefield twins. The tiny bit of guilt Jessica felt about Elizabeth's flyers went out of her mind. "It's going to be super. We'll have lots of money to spend so we can have good refreshments and real decorations. And everyone has to come dressed as their favorite character from a book." Jessica paused. Should she tell them that she was planning to go as Scarlett O'Hara? Better not, she decided. Somebody might steal her idea. Brooke smoothed her hair and frowned slightly. "Does it have to be a book character? Can't it be someone from a movie?" Brooke's father was a famous Hollywood scriptwriter, and Brooke was more interested in movies than books. Leela seemed to agree with her. "I think that's a good idea," she said. "Movies are made from scripts, and a script is sort of like a book." "Would that be okay, Jessica?" Brooke asked. Jessica liked the way Brooke seemed to be asking for permission. She pretended to be considering the suggestion carefully. Sure, Jessica said. Why not? After all, if I'm class president, I can make the rules any way I want them to be. Okay, I'll say everyone can come as characters from books or movies. She paused and then added, but not from television shows. Why not? One kid asked. Because I say so, Jessica said firmly. Just saying that made her feel powerful and important. So this is what being sixth grade president meant. Making rules and telling everyone what they could and couldn't do. She was definitely going to enjoy the job. Even Leela seemed to be looking at her with new respect. You sound like you're pretty sure you're going to win, Brooke said, smiling. Your sister's pretty popular too, you know. Ellen Reitman smirked. Yeah, but she's no fun, and everyone knows that. If she were president, the sixth grade would only get to do boring, serious stuff. Jessica knew that wasn't really true, but she didn't say anything. After all, it could only bring her more votes if everyone thought Elizabeth was boring and dull. Kimberly Haver, a seventh grade unicorn, tossed her head so her thick black hair tumbled around her shoulders. I thought about maybe running for seventh grade president this year, but I decided not to. How come? Jessica asked. Kimberly made a face. I didn't want to go to all those meetings. Jessica's face fell. Meetings? That could definitely interfere with her social life. She shrugged. When I'm president, maybe I'll just do away with meetings. Later, as she waited at the grill for the cook to fix her hot dog, Jessica thought again about Elizabeth and those flyers. Something in the back of her mind was bothering her. Elizabeth probably didn't know for sure who had thrown her flyers into the fountain, Jessica reasoned, but her sister might think that she'd had something to do with it, and in that case, Elizabeth just might be considering getting back at her. Jessica tried to push this disturbing thought from her mind. Elizabeth wasn't the type to think of any really nasty tricks, and what could she do anyway? Spread lies and rumors? That wasn't Elizabeth's style. Jessica took her hot dog and sat down at the edge of the pool, dangling her feet in the water as she ate. It was a beautiful day. She was having a good time, and there was nothing to worry about. But as hard as she tried to keep them away, thoughts of Elizabeth kept coming back to her. Leela sat down next to her. Why are you frowning like that? You'll get wrinkles if you're not careful. I'm a little worried about Elizabeth, she admitted. What if she tries to get even with me for what Ellen did? She might try, Leela said. I know I would. You'd better be on guard. Maybe when you get home you should try to sneak in her room and see if she's planning anything. That's not a bad idea, Jessica said thoughtfully. Opening the front door to the house, Jessica heard laughter coming from the top of the stairs, and she distinctly heard, "It's a fabulous plan." A second later, Elizabeth, Julie, and Amy appeared. They stopped laughing as soon as they saw Jessica. "What's the fabulous plan?" Jessica asked, smiling brightly. Elizabeth and Amy exchanged secretive glances. "Oh, something for my campaign," Elizabeth murmured. "How was your party?" Jessica's eyes darted from Julie to Amy to Elizabeth. They all had the same smug expression. Something was going on here, but Jessica pretended to be unconcerned. "Oh, it was great," she said casually. "I'll call you later," Julie said to Elizabeth. "Then we can finish making the plans for, you know." Elizabeth nodded and grinned. The second Julie and Amy were out the door, Jessica gave Elizabeth a hard look. "What's going on?" "Nothing that concerns you," Elizabeth said. But she looked so confident that it was driving Jessica wild. "Hope you didn't get too wet fishing those flyers out of the fountain," she snapped. Elizabeth glared at her. "Excuse me," she said coldly. "I'm going to help Mom with dinner." She whirled around and marched out of the room. Jessica watched her go into the kitchen. She waited a minute and then heard the sound of running water. That meant Elizabeth was probably washing vegetables. Quickly, Jessica ran upstairs, stopping on the landing to look back over her shoulder and make sure no one was watching. She headed directly for Elizabeth's room and pushed the door open. The room looked normal. As usual, the bed was neatly made and everything was in its place. Feverishly, Jessica started looking around. There had to be some clue as to what Elizabeth and her friends were planning. A search of her desk and an investigation of the closet revealed nothing. Then Jessica spotted something sticking out from under the bed. She glanced back out the door to make sure Elizabeth wasn't coming up the stairs. Then she got down on her hands and knees and pulled. It was a big cardboard poster. On the top, in huge letters, it read, Elizabeth Wakefield for 6th grade president. Under that, the letters were just slightly smaller. Show your support at a rally after the soccer game. Hear Elizabeth tell what she'll do as your class president. Jessica thought she heard steps on the stairs. She quickly pushed the poster back under the bed and hurried out of the room. Passing the stairs, she almost bumped into Stephen heading for his room. He grinned at her. What are you doing? Spying on the opposition? Jessica laughed nervously. Don't be silly. I just thought I'd left a sweater in there. I was looking for it. Yeah, sure, Stephen said. Is it time to set up the battle stations yet? Jessica rolled her eyes. It's not a battle, it's a campaign. With that, she tossed her head and went toward her room. But before she went in, she looked back at Stephen. Stephen, she said, do me a favor, okay? Don't tell Elizabeth I was in her room. Stephen looked at her knowingly. If I don't, what's in it for me? Jessica thought rapidly. I'll do the dishes for you next time it's your turn. Stephen considered this. How about the next 2 times? Jessica sighed. Okay. Then she went to her room, sat on her bed, and thought. So that was it. Elizabeth was planning a rally. Everyone was planning to go to the soccer game on Friday, and kids would probably hang around afterward. It was the perfect time to get the attention of the entire 6th grade. She wished she'd thought of a rally first. What could she possibly do to stop it? Jessica heard her mother call from downstairs to set the table. I'll be right down, she shouted. She had to think of something, and she knew she needed help, so she ran straight to the telephone. Leela, it's me, she said a few seconds later. I found out that Elizabeth's planning something. After describing the poster she found, she continued with, Elizabeth's a good talker, and she'll have all those kids there already. She just might be able to convince them to vote for her. That's true, Leela admitted. This is definitely not good for us. I'm trying to think of something we can do to top it, Jessica said. For a second, there was silence on the other end. Then Leela's voice came over, cool and confident. We don't have to top it. We just have to stop it. Jessica almost gasped. Sabotage an entire rally? How are we going to do it? Don't worry, Leela said. I'll think of something. We have 4 whole days to plan something. As she hung up, Jessica had a moment of doubt. Could she really go along with a plot to ruin her sister's rally? Then an image of the crowd at Friday's soccer game came into her mind, and her heart hardened. No way was Elizabeth going to have a big rally with a huge audience cheering for her. No way. Chapter 7. Waiting in the school parking lot, Jessica could hear a roar coming from the field where the soccer game was going on. It sounds like we scored, said Leela. Yeah, Jessica agreed, but her mind wasn't on the game. She had other things to think about. She checked her watch. Are you sure they're going to get here before the game's over? Leela didn't look the least bit anxious. They'll be here, she assured Jessica. My father said they'd be delivered this afternoon, and he'd have them sent directly here by special messenger. Jessica looked at her watch again. The game would probably be over in about 15 minutes. She wished she could feel as confident as Leela looked. For the past few days, every time she passed Elizabeth's poster, she'd had to clamp her mouth shut to keep from telling people her plan. The sign announcing Elizabeth's rally after the soccer game had been hanging right next to the bulletin board outside the cafeteria, and Jessica had seen a lot of kids looking at it. Right now she could picture Elizabeth sitting in the stands, nervous and excited about giving a campaign speech in front of all those people. Well, Elizabeth had nothing to be nervous about, Jessica thought. Her sister didn't know that by the time she was ready to give her silly little speech, there'd be nobody there to hear it. "Here they come now," Leela announced. A big black car with "Speedy Messenger Service" written on its door drove into the parking lot. The girls ran over to it as it pulled up next to the curb. A man in a uniform got out. "Miss Leela Fowler?" he inquired. "Yes," Leela replied importantly. "Put the boxes right over here." The man opened the trunk of the car and began hoisting big cardboard boxes onto the sidewalk. Each carton was emblazoned with the name of a record company. As soon as he put the first one down, Jessica quickly ripped it open. She gazed in awe at the stack of records, neatly encased in paper jackets. She carefully lifted one out and examined the label. Johnny Buck's new single, and it's not even in the record stores yet. She and Leela rapidly opened the other boxes and checked to make sure they were all the same. "I can't believe your father was able to get all these for us," Jessica exclaimed. "He's got business contacts at the record company," Leela told her. "All he had to do was make a few calls." "Just wait till everyone finds out we're giving these away free, right here," Jessica said gleefully. "Who'd want to stick around for Elizabeth's rally?" Leela nodded. "I've told all the unicorns to go through the stands and spread the word, and they're telling everyone there's not enough to go around, so if they want a free record, they'd better be here the second the game is finished. They'll probably start coming even before the game's over." Jessica's eyes shone. She knew Leela was right. Johnny Buck was a very popular rock star, and everyone at Sweet Valley Middle School was crazy about him. The stands would be empty before the clock ran out, and Elizabeth's rally was doomed. The game was an exciting one, with a close score, but Elizabeth wasn't paying much attention to it. Sitting in the front row of the stands with Julie and Amy, she kept turning around and looking at the crowd behind her. She shivered nervously. Look at all the people! She had to yell to be heard over the crowd. "Think about all those votes," Julie yelled back, grinning. "Once they hear what you've got to say, you'll have them all on your side." Elizabeth practiced her speech over and over. She'd spent the past 2 days memorizing it, and she thought she knew it by heart. The words rang in her head. "My name is Elizabeth Wakefield. I'm running for 6th grade class president." "Elizabeth, are you talking to yourself?" Amy asked curiously. Elizabeth went red. She hadn't realized she was moving her lips. She turned and looked at the crowd again. It was funny. This time there didn't seem to be as many people. Maybe she was just feeling more confident. "There's only a minute or 2 left," Julie said. "Are you ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Elizabeth replied. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed a group of kids climbing down from the stands and hurrying off in the direction of the parking lot. "Excuse me?" said a voice behind her. Elizabeth moved aside while 3 girls scrambled past her. She watched as they, too, seemed to be heading for the parking lot. "Hey, the game's not over yet," Amy called after them, but they didn't pay any attention. Elizabeth turned around. Now there were only half as many people in the stands as there had been a minute ago. "What's going on?" she asked Julie and Amy in bewilderment, but they were just as puzzled as she was. Elizabeth looked down toward the end of her row. Something curious was happening. Ellen Reitman had gone up to a bunch of 6th grade boys and was telling them something. Suddenly they all jumped up and took off. All over the stands, kids were leaving, and they all seemed to be going to the parking lot. Just then she saw Carrie Glenn and Cammie Adams, 2 6th grade girls, walking past her. "Carrie! Cammie! Where's everyone going?" Carrie turned to her excitedly. "Haven't you heard? They're giving away Johnny Buck records in the parking lot." "Who's giving them away?" Elizabeth asked them. The girls were hurrying on, but their words drifted back to her. "Leela and Jessica." Elizabeth froze. Leela and Jessica? Had she heard correctly? "The game's over," Julie said softly. She didn't have to yell now. There was no noise in the stands. Even the members of the soccer team were heading toward the parking lot. Elizabeth just sat there in shock. Slowly she turned and surveyed the stands. There were only about 10 kids still sitting there. One of them was Randy Mason. He got up and came over to Elizabeth. "Are you going to have your rally now?" he asked. "What's the point?" Elizabeth replied dully. "I'd like to hear what you have to say," Randy said. "I think it's important to know a candidate's plans." "Go ahead," Amy encouraged her. "There are still a few kids here. It can't hurt." Slowly, feeling like a robot, Elizabeth drew herself to her feet. She stepped down to the ground, turned, and faced the few kids remaining in the stands. "My name is Elizabeth Wakefield," she said, her voice quavering. "I'm running for sixth grade class president. If I'm elected, this is what I'll do." By the time she got home that afternoon, Elizabeth was so depressed she felt like bursting into tears. How could her very own twin sister do something like this? She hadn't done anything to hurt Jessica's campaign. Why would Jessica go out of her way to ruin Elizabeth's rally? She knew her expression reflected her feelings. Even her brother Stephen noticed when she walked into the living room, and Stephen wasn't the most sensitive person in the world. "What's the matter with you?" he said. "Where's Jessica?" Elizabeth asked. "I don't know. Out somewhere, I guess." He looked at her with interest. "What did she do to you this time?" Elizabeth plunked down on the sofa. "I was supposed to have a rally for my campaign after the soccer game, but everyone left even before the game was over. It turned out Jessica and Leela were giving away free Johnny Buck records in the parking lot." Stephen whistled. "Wow, she means business." Elizabeth didn't bother to respond. She just shrugged. "I just can't believe she'd do something like that to me." Stephen rolled his eyes and shook his head. "Elizabeth, you're such a wimp." Elizabeth stared at her brother. "What do you mean?" she exclaimed. "You sound like you're ready to give up." Elizabeth was afraid she might start crying. "Maybe I should just drop out. There's no way I can win if Jessica keeps pulling these dirty tricks on me." "Look," Stephen said in a serious voice, "get your act together. If you want to win this election, you've got to fight fire with fire." Elizabeth looked at him blankly. "I don't get it." Stephen sighed in exasperation. "Ugh, you got to play the game the way Jessica's playing it. If she's going to pull dirty tricks like this on you, you have to come up with some schemes of your own." Elizabeth bit her lip. "What kind of schemes?" Stephen grinned. "I've got an idea. Come on, I'll show you something I found." Elizabeth followed him out of the room and down to the basement. He led her into the laundry room. "Look," he said, pointing to what looked like a stack of cardboard on top of the dryer. Elizabeth picked one up, and her eyes widened. It was a professionally made poster. There was a photograph of Jessica on it, and above the picture it read, "Jessica Wakefield for sixth grade president." "Where did Jessica get these?" Elizabeth asked in wonderment. "Her friend Ellen has an uncle who owns a printing shop," Stephen told her. "She's planning to put them up all over school on Monday." Elizabeth stared at the posters in envy. These would definitely impress everyone. Elizabeth didn't stand a chance now. "You know," Stephen said slyly, "if something happened to these posters, Jessica wouldn't have enough time to get any more made before the election. Think about it, Elizabeth. Here's your big chance to get even." With that, he stuck his hands in his pockets and sauntered away. Elizabeth stood there, still looking at the posters. It would be so easy to rip them to shreds, but she knew she just couldn't sink to Jessica's level. Elizabeth left the laundry room and went upstairs to her bedroom. She sat at her desk and tried to think. Was there anything she could do to win this election? She'd tried flyers, but Jessica had ruined those. She'd tried a rally, but Jessica had ruined that, too. The more she thought about Jessica, the angrier she became. She realized she wasn't just angry at Jessica. She was angry at herself, too. She was letting Jessica walk all over her. Stephen was right. She was being a wimp. She spotted a thick black marking pen on her desk. For a second, she just stared at it, and suddenly she knew what she was going to do. She grabbed the pen and ran out of her room, down the stairs, and then down to the basement. She marched into the laundry room and set about getting her revenge. When she was finished, she examined her work. On every poster there was Jessica's smiling face, with a thick black mustache drawn over her lips. As she surveyed the posters, Elizabeth couldn't help but feel a little sick inside. Had she really done this? Then she thought about the flyers again and the rally. It serves her right, she told herself firmly, and went back up to her room. A few minutes later, she heard Jessica come home. When she didn't come upstairs right away, Elizabeth knew she was probably going down to the basement to look at her posters. She sat stiffly on her bed and tried to prepare herself for what she knew was about to come. A minute later, Jessica burst into Elizabeth's room. Her face was bright red, and she was clutching one of the posters in her hand. "Did you do this?" she cried furiously. "You ruined my posters." "Well, you ruined my rally," Elizabeth shouted back, "and my flyers." "I didn't have anything to do with your flyers." Elizabeth jumped up and was just about to yell something back at her when she noticed her mother standing in the doorway. "Girls, what's going on here?" "Look at what Elizabeth did," Jessica said angrily. Mrs. Wakefield looked at the poster, and her eyebrows went up. "Elizabeth, did you really do this? This is terrible. I'm very surprised at you." "You should hear what she did to me," Elizabeth exclaimed. "First, she dumped all my flyers into the school fountain. Then she made sure nobody would be at my rally." "I did not dump your stupid flyers in the fountain," Jessica yelled. "Yes, you did." "No, I didn't." "Girls, girls." Now Mrs. Wakefield was looking very upset. "Stop it right this minute." They stopped yelling, but Elizabeth's fists were clenched, and Jessica's eyes were blazing. Mrs. Wakefield sat down on Elizabeth's bed. "I was afraid something like this would happen," she said wearily. "I thought you girls were grown up enough to handle a competition. It seems I was wrong." Neither of the twins said anything. They just stood there, glaring at each other. "I think perhaps you should both drop out of this election," Mrs. Wakefield said. "Drop out?" Jessica wailed. "I can't drop out. I'm going to win." Their mother sighed. "I don't like these fights. This is not the way sisters should behave." "We won't fight any more," Jessica said quickly. "And I don't want to hear about any more nasty little tricks," Mrs. Wakefield added. She fixed her eyes sternly on Elizabeth. Elizabeth could barely bring herself to meet her mother's gaze. "No more tricks," she said softly. "I'm going to say this once, and I'm not going to say it again," their mother continued. "I don't want to hear one more argument about this campaign. If you can't go about this business in a mature and civilized way, you will both have to drop out of the election. Is that clear?" Both girls nodded. "All right," Mrs. Wakefield said, getting up. "Now come down to the kitchen and help me with dinner." She walked out of the room, and Elizabeth got up to follow her. Jessica handed her the poster. "Here," she said coldly. "You can have this for a souvenir." Tossing her head, she turned and walked out of the room. Elizabeth took one last look at the poster. Then, feeling very sad, she folded it up and threw it in the wastebasket. Chapter 8. Elizabeth and Jessica barely spoke to each other all weekend. In front of their parents, at the dinner table, they would say things like, "Pass the salt, please," but the rest of the time they avoided each other. They spent most of the weekend seeing their own friends, and when they were at home, they each stayed in their own bedrooms. By Sunday, Elizabeth felt confused and upset. She hated having these bad feelings about Jessica. That afternoon, she went over to Amy's to talk about it. "I think maybe I should just drop out and let Jessica win the election," she told her friend. "That's crazy," Amy objected. "That's just giving in to her. It's about time Jessica learned she can't always get her own way." "I know," Elizabeth said, "but she's probably going to win anyway." "Maybe," Amy said, "but you shouldn't make it so easy for her. Besides, if you drop out, you'll just get a reputation for being a quitter." Elizabeth thought about that. "You're right," she said finally. "It would be one thing if I dropped out because Jessica was the better candidate, but she's not. I know I'd be a better class president than she would. Amy agreed. Absolutely. Not to mention the fact that Miss Luster is counting on getting that VCR with the money from the book fair. Do you honestly think I have a chance of winning? Elizabeth asked her. I think so, Amy said slowly. Of course, those free records will probably help Jessica, but when we have the assembly on Tuesday, you'll get another chance to tell the class what you'll do as president. I think then the kids will see that you'd be much better than Jessica. I hope so, Elizabeth said, but she wasn't feeling very confident. At school on Monday, she tried to talk to as many students as she could. By lunchtime, she was feeling a little bit better. Several kids had told her they liked the idea of buying a VCR for the library, but others said they preferred the idea of having a party. It seemed to her that she and Jessica each had about the same number of votes. It was impossible to tell who would end up winning. Amy and Julie were waiting for her outside the cafeteria. Julie was studying something tacked to the bulletin board. Look at this, she said to Elizabeth. It was a computer printout. The letters were so small and light, Elizabeth could barely read it. If you want to hear what Randy Mason will do for you, come to a rally after school today, she read aloud. She shook her head sadly. Poor Randy. He still thinks he's got a real chance to win. He'll probably say he wants to spend the book fair money on computer equipment, Julie said. And since we've already got loads of that stuff, I don't think anyone's going to get too excited about that idea. I wonder if anyone will actually show up for his rally, Amy said. Elizabeth looked at the notice again. I think we should go, she said. After all, he came to my rally. That's okay with me, Amy said. At least I'll have 3 people to speak to. Amy was almost right. Actually, there were 5 at the rally. The 3 girls plus 2 boys who were friends of Randy's. When the girls arrived, Randy was telling the boys that if he became president, he'd put all the school activities into the computer system. Then, when kids wanted to know what was going on each day, they could hit a button on one of the school's computer terminals and find out. For example, Randy said, if someone were interested in stamp collecting, they could type on the computer keyboard and find out when the Stamp Collectors Club meets. I didn't even know there was a Stamp Collectors Club, Amy whispered to Elizabeth. Elizabeth found a lot of what Randy had to say was pretty interesting. He had a really good idea for a 6th grade charity project. He thought the class could take up a collection to sponsor a child in a foreign country. The whole 6th grade could be foster parents for some needy child, he said enthusiastically. He also had ideas for new school activities. Sports are great, he said, but I think there should be more competitive activities for kids who don't like physical sports. Maybe we could start championship chess matches or Scrabble contests. Those are good ideas, Elizabeth whispered to her friends. You know, I don't think he's such a nerd after all. Julie raised her hand. Randy, what do you think should be done with the money the 6th grade will make from the book fair? I've been thinking about that, Randy said. I know Jessica Wakefield says we should spend the money on a big party. He turned to Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, you think we should spend it on a VCR for the library, right? Right, Elizabeth said. What do you think we should spend the money on? I think we should have both. What? Elizabeth stared at him. Maybe Randy wasn't as smart as she had thought. We don't have enough money to do both. We will if we do it this way, Randy said. First, we spend the money on a big party. But then there won't be money for a VCR, Elizabeth interrupted. Yes, there will, Randy continued, smiling, if we charge money to go to the party. See, it works like this. The 6th grade sponsors the party, but the students have to buy tickets if they want to go. Then we use the ticket money to buy the VCR for the library. Elizabeth gasped. It was so simple. Why hadn't she thought of that? That's a fantastic idea, she said to Julie and Amy as they walked home. No kidding, Amy said. That way, everyone would be happy. It's the perfect solution, Julie agreed. All the kids will love it. Elizabeth, why don't you suggest that idea tomorrow at the assembly? Amy suggested. I can't do that, Elizabeth objected. It's Randy's idea. Okay, maybe Randy thought of it first, Amy said, but you know he doesn't have a chance of winning. Amy's right, Julie said. I think the votes are pretty evenly split between you and Jessica. If you say you'll spend the money on a party and a VCR, that could bring a lot more votes to your side. Elizabeth considered Julie's idea for a minute. I guess I could tell the audience it's Randy's idea, but if I'm elected, I'll spend the money that way too. She was still thinking it over when she got home. Randy's idea, plus her own popularity, would definitely give her the edge over Jessica. But was it fair to Randy? Randy couldn't possibly beat both Elizabeth and Jessica, so if Elizabeth didn't present his idea and Jessica won, then the class would only get the party. Elizabeth was totally confused. She needed to talk this out with someone, so she was very happy to find her mother reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. Elizabeth sat down next to her mother. I've got a problem with the campaign, she told her. Mrs. Wakefield sighed. Elizabeth, are you and Jessica at it again? I told you, it's got nothing to do with Jessica, Elizabeth said quickly. She told her mother about Randy's idea for the book fair money. That's a very good idea, Mrs. Wakefield said. I suppose that means Randy will win the election. Is that why you're upset? Elizabeth shook her head. Randy can't win this election, even with the best idea. He's not very popular. In fact, most of the kids don't like him. That's too bad, said Mrs. Wakefield, especially if his idea is the best one. It is the best idea, Elizabeth said, and I think that if I tell the sixth graders that's the way I'll spend the money too, I could win. But wouldn't that be stealing Randy's idea? Her mother asked. Not exactly, Elizabeth said. I mean, I'd tell everyone it was his idea. I wouldn't try to pretend I thought of it myself. I don't know, Elizabeth, her mother said, shaking her head. It doesn't feel right to me. Elizabeth nodded reluctantly. I know. It doesn't feel right to me either. But I know Randy won't win, no matter how good his ideas are. And if I say I'll do the same thing and I win, the whole school will benefit. And if you don't take Randy's idea, what will happen then? Mrs. Wakefield asked. Elizabeth sighed. If Jessica wins, all they'll get is a costume party. Her mother smiled sympathetically. I know it's a hard decision to make, Elizabeth, and I wish I could tell you what to do. But it's your decision, and I think it's something you should handle on your own. She reached out and patted Elizabeth's hand. Honey, I know it's not easy trying to figure out the right thing to do, but it's all part of growing up. Just think about it for a while, and I'm sure you'll realize what you have to do. Elizabeth had a feeling that that was what her mother was going to say. And deep in her heart, she knew her mother was right. It was her decision to make, but how should she make it? What was the right thing to do? Okay, Mom, she said. I'll think about it. She was still sitting at the kitchen table, alone, when Jessica came walking in a half-hour later. She walked directly to the refrigerator without speaking to Elizabeth, took out an apple, then started to leave. Jessica, wait, Elizabeth said. What do you want? Jessica asked coldly. Elizabeth took a deep breath. Look, I'm really sorry about marking up your posters. Jessica looked surprised. You are? Elizabeth nodded. Yeah, it was a pretty nasty thing for me to do. Jessica shrugged and turned as if to walk out of the room. She paused at the doorway, though, and turned around. I'm sorry about messing up your rally, she said. Apologies didn't come easy to her, and she didn't sound terribly sincere, but Elizabeth didn't mind. At least Jessica was making an effort to get along. It was actually Leela's idea, Jessica added hastily. A slightly abashed grin crossed her face, but I guess I shouldn't have gone along with it. What about the flyers? Elizabeth asked. Whose idea was that? Honestly, Lizzie, I had nothing to do with that. It was Ellen. She found the flyers in the library and threw them in the fountain. Oh. This time Elizabeth actually believed her. She put her elbows on the table and her chin in her hands. We've both been acting awfully silly. Yeah, I guess so, Jessica said, pulling up a chair and joining her. But I still want to win this election. Elizabeth nodded. So do I. Just think, Jessica said dreamily. Tomorrow at this time, one of us will be the sixth grade class president. I know, Elizabeth said, but which one? She smiled at her twin. No matter which of us wins, we'll still be like we've always been. Not just sisters, but best friends, too. Right? Right, Jessica replied. Just don't go putting any more mustaches on my pictures, okay? Elizabeth felt ashamed. That was a pretty nasty thing for me to do, wasn't it? Jessica's eyes were sparkling. Oh, I don't know about that. It sounds exactly like the kind of thing I'd do. And for the first time in a while, both twins burst out laughing. Chapter 9. Jessica, aren't you ready yet? Elizabeth stood in the entrance to Jessica's bedroom with her hands on her hips. Jessica was wearing only her slip and standing in the middle of a pile of clothes. I don't know what to wear, Jessica wailed. I'm going to give a speech in front of the entire 6th grade, and I've got to look fabulous. Elizabeth marched over to the pile of discarded outfits and pulled out a dark pink jersey dress. Wear this, she ordered. It's not bright enough, Jessica complained. I want to stand out on the stage. Elizabeth opened a drawer in Jessica's bureau and extracted a purple sash. Wear this with it, she suggested. This is definitely bright. Jessica looked at it doubtfully. Purple with pink? Do you think it goes together? It's a major fashion statement, Elizabeth said firmly. I saw something exactly like it in this month's issue of Teen Styles. That wasn't exactly true, but Elizabeth thought it sounded good. Okay, Jessica said, and took the sash from Elizabeth. Then she gasped. I can't wear this. You're wearing orange. We'll clash. Elizabeth groaned. Then we'll sit with Randy in between us. Who? Randy Mason, dummy, the other candidate. Oh, yeah. Jessica pulled on the pink dress. I keep forgetting about him. She went over to the mirror. How should I fix my hair? Jess, just hurry up. We can't be late today. Elizabeth tried hard not to sound too impatient, but watching her sister fuss like this was making her feel uncomfortable, because she knew, at least she had a pretty strong suspicion, that Jessica wasn't going to win the election, not if Elizabeth went ahead and did what she was thinking about doing. When they arrived at school, the twins headed directly for the auditorium. Once again, the entire 6th grade was filing in. Jessica called and waved to everyone in sight, but Elizabeth could barely bring herself to smile. Her stomach was in knots. She was glad she was walking with her sister. Whenever she was really nervous about something, there was no one she'd rather be with than Jessica, and she wanted to stay as close to her as possible. Right now they were on good terms with each other, but after this assembly, Jessica might never speak to her again. Amy ran over to Elizabeth and pinched her. That's for good luck, she said. Elizabeth smiled weakly. Thanks, she managed to say. But luck wasn't what she needed. What she needed today was courage. Once again, Mr. Bowman climbed up to the stage. Get a load of that outfit, Jessica whispered to Elizabeth, giggling. The teacher was wearing a plaid jacket with a green shirt and a tie that looked like it contained every color in the rainbow. It was pretty awful, Elizabeth had to admit. And you were worried about clashing with me, she whispered back. On the stage next to Mr. Bowman, there was a podium and 3 empty chairs. Elizabeth had a pretty good idea who they were for. Sure enough, as everyone took a seat, Mr. Bowman called out, "Will the 3 candidates please come up here?" As Jessica and Elizabeth made their way onto the stage, Elizabeth could hear a group of kids chanting, "Jessica, Jessica, Jessica." Immediately, another group started yelling, "Elizabeth, Elizabeth, Elizabeth." Elizabeth turned and saw Randy Mason following them up to the stage. He didn't look the least bit bothered by the fact that nobody was chanting his name. They sat down, Randy at one end, Jessica and Elizabeth next to each other. Suddenly Jessica jumped up and asked Randy something. Randy looked a little puzzled, but he got up and changed seats with her. Elizabeth almost started laughing. With all the tension of the situation, Jessica was still concerned that she and Elizabeth might clash. Okay, everyone, let's settle down, Mr. Bowman said into the microphone on the podium. The room got quiet as the sixth graders turned to him with expressions of eager anticipation. Elizabeth's eyes scanned the room. She saw Amy looking excited and happy, and there was Julie giving her a V for victory signal. She hoped she wouldn't be letting them down. As you all know, Mr. Bowman said, today you will be electing your new class president. Each candidate will speak to you about his or her plans for the year. Following each speech, you will have an opportunity to ask them questions. First, I will introduce all the candidates. He turned and smiled at the three of them. On the right, Jessica Wakefield. The room burst into applause and cheers of Jessica, Jessica, Jessica. Mr. Bowman had to hold up his hand to get the room quiet again. On the left is Elizabeth Wakefield. Elizabeth was pleased to hear just as much applause and cheering as there had been for Jessica. And in the middle, Randy Mason. This time there was only a smattering of applause, and no one called out Randy's name, but no one was rude either. The first candidate to speak is Jessica Wakefield. Jessica bounced up from her seat and sauntered over to the podium. Elizabeth marveled at how cool and confident she seemed. When she got to the podium, Jessica tossed her head so her blonde curls bobbed around her shoulders. Then she flashed a brilliant smile at the audience. As you all know, Jessica said brightly, we're going to have a book fair and make lots of money. If I'm elected sixth grade class president, we'll spend that money on a fantastic party. She stopped then and just stood there smiling, as if she were waiting for some more applause. Is that all you have to say? Mr. Bowman asked. Jessica looked at him uncertainly. Then she turned back to the audience. Like I said, it'll be an unbelievably super party. Everyone has to come dressed as their favorite character from a book. If you don't like to read, you can come as your favorite character from a movie, but not from a television show. Why not? Someone yelled out from the audience. Jessica grinned. I don't know. I just figured there ought to be some rules. Listening to Jessica speak, Elizabeth tried to hide her smile. Jessica didn't have the slightest idea what a class president had to do. She figured she could win the election on charm alone, and she was definitely charming. Elizabeth hoped that, for once, Jessica's charm wouldn't be enough. Have you anything more to say, Jessica? Mr. Bowman asked. Nope, that's it. The teacher looked out at the sixth graders. Are there any questions for Jessica? Amy jumped up. I'd like to ask Jessica what else she'll do as sixth grade president. Jessica stared at her blankly. Huh? What are you going to do besides spend the book fair money on a costume party? Gee, I don't know, Jessica said, looking a little flustered. Whatever sixth grade presidents are supposed to do, I guess. She paused, then added, as long as it doesn't take too much time. With that, she offered one more bright smile and returned to her seat. Mr. Bowman looked a little amused. Then he addressed the class again. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Wakefield. Somehow Elizabeth managed to pull herself up and make it to the podium. If she was just going to make the campaign speech she had originally planned, she'd be feeling much more confident. But what she had to say wasn't going to be so easy. She was almost surprised to hear her own voice coming out so calmly. I decided to run for sixth grade class president because I had an idea for the book fair money too. I thought we should spend the money on a VCR for the library. I still think that's a good idea, but Randy Mason has an even better idea. She paused and took a deep breath. That's why I am going to drop out of the race. A gasp went through the room. Elizabeth couldn't even bring herself to look at Amy's or Julie's faces. I'm sure Randy will be telling you about his idea, she continued, and I hope you'll all agree with me that his plan is the best. I also hope that all of you who are going to vote for me will vote for Randy instead. Thank you. By now, the whole audience was buzzing. Elizabeth started to head back to her chair, then realized that if she wasn't a candidate anymore, she had no business being up there. So instead, she stepped down from the stage and took a seat in the audience. Wow, the girl sitting next to her whispered. That took real guts. Elizabeth smiled and said thanks. But her smile faded when she caught Jessica's expression back up on the stage. Jessica looked completely shocked. Mr. Bowman seemed pretty surprised, too. But once the audience had quieted down, he spoke again. Next, we will hear from Randy Mason. Randy looked poised as he made his way to the podium, and when he spoke, he sounded very self-assured. First of all, I want to thank Elizabeth for her support. I'm glad she likes my idea for the book fair money, and I hope you all will, too. Randy described his plan to use the money for a party, charge admission, and use that money to buy a VCR for the library. This way, he said, we can have something fun and something useful, too. He went on to talk about his other ideas, the daily activities printout and sponsoring a child overseas. As Elizabeth looked around the quiet auditorium, she could tell that everyone was actually listening. She did hear one boy whispering to another behind her, "You know, I always thought that guy was a real nerd, but he's kind of sharp." Elizabeth recognized the voice of the boy responding to him. "I nominated him, you know," Jim Sturbridge bragged. When Randy finished his speech, lots of kids had questions for him, like what he would do to help raise sixth grade school spirit and how to get more people involved in school activities. For each question, Randy responded with a thoughtful, intelligent comment. As he returned to his seat, Elizabeth looked to see how her sister was reacting. Jessica was scowling, and Elizabeth felt more than a little sorry for her. She thought she'd better feel sorry for herself, too. Jessica must be furious with her. But still, she had no regrets for what she'd done. Mr. Bowman went up to the podium. "We will now vote by secret ballot. Write down your vote, then pass your ballots forward." As Elizabeth waited for her ballot, she felt a hand on her shoulder. When she turned, she saw Amy huddled down in the row behind her. "Why did you do that?" Amy asked. Elizabeth smiled. "He had the best idea, and he ought to win. But I knew he couldn't win against both me and Jessica. So I figured by dropping out and throwing him my votes, he might have a chance." "Yes, I guess you're right," Amy said. "Are you going to vote for him over Jessica?" Elizabeth hadn't even thought about that. Amy hurried back to her seat, and Elizabeth found herself holding a stack of ballots, taking one and passing them on. Now what? On the one hand, Jessica was Elizabeth's own twin sister, but on the other hand, Elizabeth knew who'd make the better class president. And even with his great platform, against Jessica's popularity, Randy needed all the help he could get. Feeling a little bit like a traitor, and glancing around to make sure no one was looking, she scribbled Randy Mason on her ballot. Then she folded it and refolded it. The sixth grade teachers came down the aisles and collected the ballots. Mr. Bowman put them into a basket and announced that he'd take them backstage for counting. The minute he disappeared, students began getting out of their seats and gathering in little groups. Randy came down from the stage, and he was immediately surrounded by a small group of kids. Elizabeth felt a little sick as she saw Jessica leave the stage and start toward her. Luckily, though, Leela and Ellen pulled her aside. But it was only a temporary reprieve, Elizabeth knew. Sooner or later, she'd have to face Jessica. She'd just rather it be later. A few minutes went by before Mr. Bowman returned to the stage. Everyone rushed back to their seats. "We have a winner," Mr. Bowman announced. A hush came over the crowd. "The new sixth grade president is—" He paused for dramatic effect. "Randy Mason." Chapter 10. Elizabeth had mixed feelings when she arrived home from school that afternoon. She was still proud of what she had done. Randy Mason was going to be a terrific class president. He was so pleased and happy about his election that it made her feel really good about helping him win. After school, Randy had asked her if she'd like to be special executive assistant to the president. She wasn't sure what that meant, but it certainly sounded important, so she was feeling pretty good about that too. But Elizabeth knew she still had to face Jessica. Somehow she'd managed to avoid her all day at school. That wasn't too hard. Every time she saw Jessica, She was surrounded by sympathetic, consoling unicorns. But now Elizabeth was home. She hoped Jessica wouldn't be there yet, but that hope was dashed the minute she walked through the door. Stephen was in the kitchen, eating as usual. "I guess you won the election," he said between mouthfuls. "No, I didn't win. I dropped out," Elizabeth said. "Randy Mason won." "Why did you think I did?" Stephen looked surprised. "Because Jessica came storming in the house like a tornado and went straight up to her room. I figured you must have beaten her." Elizabeth shook her head. "No, but I guess I had something to do with Randy winning." "Well, I'd watch out if I were you," Stephen said. "From the way she was moving, I wouldn't want to get in her way." "Thanks for the warning," Elizabeth said weakly. She left the kitchen and went upstairs to her room, trying to be as quiet as possible. Maybe she could manage to hide until dinner. But she'd been in her room less than a minute when her door burst open and Jessica rushed in. Elizabeth's eyes were fixed on the floor. "Lizzie!" Elizabeth raised her eyes reluctantly, expecting to confront the angriest face she'd ever encountered. But to her amazement, that wasn't what she saw. Jessica was grinning from ear to ear. In one hand, she clutched a battered book. "I've got it," she said gleefully. Elizabeth looked at her in bewilderment. "Got what?" Jessica thrust the book toward her. "I figured out what you can be for the costume party." Elizabeth took the book from her. It was the twins' old copy of Alice in Wonderland. Jessica pointed to an illustration. "You can be Alice. We can do your hair like this and find a cute little pinafore." "That's a good idea," Elizabeth said. "This was always one of my favorite books when I was little." Jessica looked very pleased with herself. "I'm going to have to help a lot of kids with this. Randy asked me to be in charge of organizing the party." "Really? That's great," Elizabeth said sincerely. "I've got to get right to work," Jessica continued. "I have to set up a committee for decorations and another one for refreshments." As she started out of the room, Elizabeth stopped her. "Jess," she said, "aren't you angry about what I did in the assembly?" Jessica paused. "Well, I think it was a pretty dumb thing to do, but I guess it worked out okay. I just found out class presidents have meetings almost every week. I wouldn't even have time for my ballet classes." And with that, she danced happily out of the room. At dinner that evening, Elizabeth told the whole family what had happened. Only Stephen looked disappointed. "I was sort of looking forward to the featherweight championship battle of the century." "Well, we're proud of you, Elizabeth," Mr. Wakefield said. "We're proud of both of you. Elizabeth did something very noble, and Jessica, you seem to be taking your defeat very well." "I probably could have won if I really wanted to," Jessica said. "But all those meetings? Yuck." Mrs. Wakefield smiled at Elizabeth. "I'm sure that wasn't an easy decision for you to make, honey. I know you really wanted to be class president." Elizabeth nodded. "But I know I did the right thing, and that's just as good as winning." Jessica's eyebrows went up. "It is?" Elizabeth grinned. "Well, almost." Chapter 11. Jessica was sitting in front of the television on Saturday afternoon when Elizabeth walked into the den. "What are you watching?" Elizabeth asked her. "Music videos," Jessica replied, without removing her eyes from the screen. "Look at that singer. Isn't he amazing?" Elizabeth looked at the TV. "He's cute," she agreed. "Cute? He's gorgeous," Jessica sighed. "I wish I could meet a boy like that." "He's not a boy, Jess," Elizabeth said. "He's a man. He must be at least 20. "Yeah, I guess he is kind of old," Jessica admitted. "But boys our age are so, I don't know, childish. I wish I could meet an older boy." She grinned at Elizabeth. "Wouldn't it be neat to go out with a 16-year-old boy? He'd be able to drive." "But I don't think many 16-year-old boys want to date 12-year-old girls," Elizabeth noted. "I suppose not." Jessica got up and looked at herself in a mirror. "Don't you think I could pass for someone older, like maybe 14? Elizabeth looked at her suspiciously. "Okay, Jessica, what are you up to now?" Jessica laughed. "Don't be silly, Lizzie. I don't even know any 16-year-old boys. Listen, do you want to go to the skating rink? I'm meeting Leela there." Elizabeth hesitated. Amy was going to come over a little later, but the two of them hadn't made any plans. Roller skating sounded like fun. I'm not sure, she replied. Maybe Amy and I will come. Jessica ran upstairs to brush her hair and pick out the perfect outfit for roller skating. That took longer than she had planned, and by the time she rode her bike to the rink, she was 15 minutes late. Putting on her skates, she spotted Leela way over on the other side of the rink. She quickly finished lacing up the skates and took off. She was skating faster than usual, trying to catch up with Leela. With all the other kids skating around her, she had to dodge around in between them. She was doing pretty well until another girl darted in front of her. Then Jessica lost her balance and started to fall. But before she could hit the ground, a strong hand grabbed her arm and hoisted her up. Thanks, Jessica said, and looked up to see her rescuer. She practically gasped. The person who had helped her had to be one of the best-looking boys she'd ever seen. His Sweet Valley High t-shirt revealed tanned, muscular arms. He had wavy blonde hair and eyes so green they could have been traffic lights. Are you okay? The boy asked, sounding concerned. You almost took a bad fall just now. Jessica hoped she wasn't blushing. She must have looked like an idiot, she thought, practically tripping over her own feet. And right in front of the most gorgeous boy on earth. He had to be even cuter than that rock star on TV. I'm okay, she managed to say, but if you hadn't caught me, I might have broken a leg or something. You were going pretty fast, he said. Where's the fire? Jessica laughed lightly and tossed her head so her hair would bounce around her shoulders. No fire. I was just trying to catch up with my friend. He raised his eyebrows. Boyfriend? Oh, no, Jessica said hastily. Just a girlfriend. That's good, he said, and his brown eyes sparkled. Jessica couldn't believe it. He was actually flirting with her. And now that she'd had a chance to look at him more carefully, she knew he had to be a teenager, at least 15, maybe even older. I'm Josh Angler, he said. I haven't seen you around Sweet Valley High. Are you new in town? Before Jessica could reply, a voice behind her called, Jessica, there you are. Jessica turned and saw Leela on the sidelines, her hands on her hips. She didn't look very happy. I'll be right there, Jessica called. She turned to Josh. I guess I better go meet my friend. Well, at least I know your name now, Josh said. Are you going to be around for a while? Sure, Jessica said. She could feel her heart beating wildly. Josh had a wonderful smile. Then maybe we could have a soda later, he suggested. Jessica tossed her head again. Okay. Jessica? Leela's voice was louder and more insistent. See you later, Jessica told Josh, and turned to skate toward Leela. Try and stay on your feet now, he called after her. Jessica felt as if her feet would never touch the ground again. Who are you talking to? Leela asked as Jessica skated closer. His name's Josh, Jessica said. He caught me when I almost fell. Isn't he cute? She giggled. I think he likes me. He wants to have a soda later. You're kidding. Leela looked really surprised. He looks old to me. He is, Jessica said. He goes to Sweet Valley High. Leela sniffed. Well, he might like you now, but wait till he finds out you're only 12 years old. Jessica shrugged and grinned slyly. Maybe he doesn't have to find out. What do you mean? Leela asked, her eyes narrowing. Jessica just laughed. Come on, she said. Let's skate. And she took off, leaving Leela standing there with her mouth open. Will Josh Angler be that perfect older boy that Jessica has been dreaming about? Find out in Sweet Valley Twins number 15, The Older Boy.